Okay, so this is recording. All right, so what we're going to do today is I'm going to take you through procedural safeguards. We're going to do a little bit of a reminder of what we talked about on Monday. Just one second, I want to present my screen. So I'm gonna share my screen. Please let me know if you can or cannot see it.
Oh, cool.
Can you see?
Yeah.
All right, how's that? Can you see that?
Yeah.
Everybody?
Yeah.
Yes, yes, you can see refresher. Who's a parent?
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Very good. I'm gonna put myself in there just so. Hang on. It won't let me turn myself. I'm trying to, whatever. Never mind, you don't need to see my face. Okay, it's really not that special. Okay, so, okay, what did I just do? Can everybody still see the screen?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So we talked about on Monday, we talked about the lengthy definition of a parent, right? And here it is again. Here's the slide that we went through, and it basically just reminds you that you can't just on face value say a parent is a parent is a parent. And there are a lot of unique situations anymore that you may come across, things that I probably have never encountered that you're going to encounter. And so, you know, families form up and it's not always blood relations, and that's okay. But what you have to be cautious about is ensuring that if you are doing something under the law, under special education law, you want to be sure that when you're doing it, that you're working with someone who has the capacity to give consent. And that's probably the biggest thing. And so any of these people on this list right here are people that would have the capacity to give consent. Okay? So with that, I'm going to jump to the next slide. So who's never the parent? Who is never the parent? Who remembers that?
The state.
That's exactly right, Samson. Absolutely. The state is never the parent. And why aren't they the parent? Because federal law says they can't be the parent. That's pretty much it. That's the whole thing. Federal law says you must have someone who meets the definition of a parent, and the state does not. So if you come across a social worker or some other individual working under the auspices of the state, you have to remember that they cannot sign consent. They can be invited to meetings and things like that, and that's very typical, especially with foster kids. You'll have the social worker there, but they just can't give consent for things like evaluations and consent for initial placement. Okay? It also is important because you want to be sure that you are giving notice to the right individuals. You remember my scenario I had the other day about the two parents that still came to the meetings, and but one of them didn't actually have any educational rights. And so by law, we really didn't have to give that individual parent notice and things like that. We still did, but he couldn't sign consent or do anything like that because of how his divorce decree was set up. Okay, so today, we've already talked about your work on the prior notice consent for evaluation. Probably the one thing I would say that everybody just wants to tighten up on is you all documented parent input, which was great, but don't forget, just go a little bit further, and I gave everybody a note on your sheet that said, remember to document the date you talked to the parent, or the date that you got an email from the parent, and then say the format in which you made that contact. Like, on this date, we talked on the phone, or on this day, I talked to you after school, and you said blah, blah, blah. So everybody was able to say, yep, parent gave us this input, but also just go a little bit further and tell a date and how you gathered it. Was it through an email, was it through a phone call, or through a person-to-person connection? Okay? And that's going to make it even more, I would call it bulletproof, for lack of a better term. Okay, so today I want to talk about the procedural safeguards document, and I want you just to start to become familiar with it. And I'm going to jump out of the presentation mode and jump over to Moodle, because I want you to see I have the procedural safeguards document up for you. And I'm just quickly going to open that. You can see right up here at the top, there are 42 pages in the parental rights document. And, oh, dogs are barking, sorry. So why do you care that it's 42 pages long? The reason that you care that it's 42 pages long is because if you are ever a special educator who is responsible for explaining the procedural safeguards, you need to know your stuff. Okay, so that's basically what we're doing today is I'm trying to get you to a comfort level with what is in that document. And if you notice, I'm going to keep flipping back and forth between these two screens. You can see it says South Dakota Parental Rights and Procedural Safeguards. You will hear people refer to, including myself, either parental rights or procedural safeguards. But basically, for your purposes, what you need to know is it's basically one and the same. If we're saying parental rights, those are procedural safeguards. Does that make sense, everybody? You have to answer me. I can't see any of you.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay.
Sorry, I fell in the snowbank.
Oh, God. Are you okay?
I think so.
All right. Okay. I think you get some sort of an award for the most dedicated student falling in a snowbank while you're attending my lecture. Okay. So I don't know why I can't get, can you guys see that little recording screen thing? I don't know why.
Yeah.
I don't know why it won't go away. It's supposed to like be able to flip between me and it, but it won't flip. So I don't know why. All right, not important. Okay, so I'm just going to about 10 up. Good. Okay, so what you need to know about this document is, you remember how I talked about how the parental rights is part of the prior written notice? Basically, when you put those two documents together, when you fill out that prior written notice and you have a copy of the procedural safeguards or parents' rights with it, that is a complete notice. All right? Now, it doesn't mean that you won't ever do a prior written notice without giving a copy of this 42-page document, and here's why. Okay? In the law, it says you have to give parents a copy of that set of rights at least once every year. All right? But while that's a nice thing, and you're like, great, I can just give everybody one at the beginning of the year, the challenge is the federal law doesn't say this is the only time you have to give it to them. You also have to give it to, whoa, darn it, have to, oh, hang on, there it is. Okay, you have to give this to them other times during the year when these following things happen, which is 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'm just going to move my screen over just a little bit for recording purposes. So if there's an initial referral, then you're going to give the parents a copy of that document, that 42-page document, along with a prior written notice, which responds to their request for an evaluation or a referral. Now, you may have a child who's already identified, and the parent somewhere in the middle of the school year says, you know what, I would really like a test on phonological processing or phonological awareness. And so then you would need to respond to that with a prior written notice, and you would have to include a copy of their rights. If a parent asks for a copy of their rights, they have to get it. If a child with a disability is disciplined and it changes their placement, and we're going to talk more about that, but if it's a change in placement, and you can be out of school for up to 10 days in a school year and it's not considered a change in placement. So if you discipline them for more than 10 days, you're going to likely be changing the child's placement because of that discipline, and so then you would give them parental rights. And then the other time is if a parent files a complaint or a due process hearing. So when I was working with my staff in Brookings, what I would say to them is, yeah, I know you can give it to them just one time a year, but honestly, you can never give the parents rights. You can't give somebody too much due process. So what I would always advise is anytime you're sending a notice of an action, include a copy of parental rights, or if you're at a meeting, offer a copy to the parent. And by the time the parent's been in the special education processes for a while, they've probably got 5 or 10 copies, and they're going to say, no, I'm good. So you won't be wasting paper. The other thing I would also recommend you do is that you keep a copy of your notice posted somewhere on your district's website that's fairly prominent. But I don't recommend doing this in lieu of providing actual copies, because a parent could claim, well, I couldn't access my rights because I don't have a computer, or I didn't have internet that month, or whatever. So I encourage you to remember that we talked about sending notices electronically. If a family has opted in to accept notices electronically, just send them that neat, handy dandy little PDF, and you can see right over here, I'll go back to it. All you got to do is just hit your download button, and you can download this, and you're going to save, you know, X number of trees by sending it electronically. And electronically is as good as handing them a real copy. Okay, so jumping back in. Oh my goodness. Well, let me get to that. Okay, hang on. All right. So South Dakota always provides a parental rights document. And ever since I worked for, you know, the state of South Dakota, so this goes all the way back to 1992, a really long time ago, we provided rights in a published document that schools could just take and print themselves and hand to their parents. Typically, any state you go to is going to have some sort of a model parental rights brochure. So if you have the state's produced document, you're going to cover all the federally mandated content that has to be given to parents. Okay? But what you also need to do is you have to be able to explain it. And that's why we're going through this today, because I want you to have a comfort level of what is in that document. All right? So on page 5 of this document, it covers initial evaluation, services, reevaluation, and other consent regulations related to parental consent. So there's an explanation on these pages about what the district has to obtain parental consent for. And you guys have already been exposed to this through the prior notice written consent, and we've talked a little bit about you have to get initial consent just to provide services. Okay? Then there's some language about prior written notice. And you guys have also already experienced this instruction. We have talked about the content requirements of the notice. It has to be an easily understood language and in their native language or another mode of communication unless it's not feasible. So if I move to South Dakota and I speak Farsi or I speak a dialect that perhaps is not terribly common of now I can't reach for any of my languages right now. There's so many different languages that I can't think of any of them. But more and more you can get documents translated, and translators online are better than they used to be, but it's not always perfect. A lot of times those translations are a little bit lacking. You might actually need to have someone skilled in that individual's first language come to your IEP meetings and be there and help you interpret the parental rights document for the family. Again, it's that whole IDEA's requirement that parents be involved and understand and be informed about what the district is planning to do. So we've already talked about getting notices electronically, so we don't have to spend too much time on that. Another part of the procedural safeguards document is the right to an independent educational evaluation. This would be if a parent disagrees with an evaluation that's been done. This doesn't mean they can just walk in anytime they want to and say, I want an independent evaluation and I want the district to pay for it. It has to be in response to an evaluation that the district conducted. So if a parent wants this independent evaluation, they can go to the district, make that request. The district's response is one of two things. It's kind of like when you get a referral. You either say yes or no to a referral. You either say, yes, we will pay for an independent evaluation, and here is a list of people that can provide it for you. Or no, we don't want to pay for this evaluation, so we're going to take you to a hearing to substantiate or prove in a hearing process that our evaluations are adequate. So a lot of districts, you know, by the time you spend the time to defend your evaluations, are going to spend more than it would cost to pay for an independent evaluation. So the general rule of thumb has been, if someone asks for an independent evaluation, it is just probably going to be best to say, yes, you can have one, and then you provide them the information. As a district, you have to maintain information about where families can go to get independent evaluations, because of course that's not information families have in their back pocket. They don't know who else could conduct a autism evaluation or a speech language evaluation or an ability evaluation. And so the school is obligated to have a list that they can provide when the family requests it. All right, other things, we already covered most of this. If a family does choose to get independent evaluations, that information can be used as part of a due process hearing. probably the other big thing that has to happen is the criteria for the evaluators has to be the same. There are some very interesting people out there who want to hang a shingle out and say they do evaluations, and sometimes they don't actually have the qualifications or the training. And so that's why that list is so important. When families go to select someone, you know whatever you're paying for as a district is going to be a kind of a same apples to apples comparison of evaluations. Anybody have any questions about independent evaluations?
No.
No.
No. Has anybody ever been in a situation where they've been part of an evaluation or have had a family member or seen an evaluation occurring? No?
Well, my nanny family got an IE.
They did. Okay.
They got one for physical therapy.
Okay, because they disagreed with the results that the school had?
They disagreed with the fact that the school was trying to cut down on his time.
Okay, so they were trying to just show there was more of a need than the evaluation that the school did was showing?
Right.
Okay, and that would be I think a pretty reasonable purpose for asking for an evaluation like that. The one thing, and I don't know if you noticed it on the slide because I kind of jumped through them pretty fast, but you don't actually have to tell the school why you want the independent evaluation. That's not something they're entitled to, request of you. You can just say, I want an independent evaluation, and they have to provide it or take you to a hearing. So it's one or the other. Okay, we'll jump back to the screen now. Can everybody see my screen, or do I need to share it again? I bet I need to share it again, don't I?
Yeah.
Sorry, just one second. Let me go back to my screen. And I know, Lizzie, what time do you need to be done today, Lizzie? Lizzie, what time do you need to be done today?
Shoot, I forgot to turn my microphone on.
That's okay.
Yeah, I already drove here, so I'm good with whenever.
Okay, all right.
I have to dig myself out of the snow before work, so.
What time do you have to work?
Well, 3.
Okay. All right, we'll try to, I'm not going to get through all of this today because there's just way too much content. So we'll finish this on Friday, but I'm going to keep going. I'm going to go for at least another 10 minutes, okay?
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Get us through as much of this as I can. Hang on. Okay, so that's independent educational evaluations. Go to the next one. All right, confidentiality. You all are under FERPA, whether you knew it or not. The educational records that are developed for you, both when you were in high school, if you attended a public or private high school, and then once you entered college, continue to be under the Protection of Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, also known as FERPA. That's usually the acronym you hear the most. And it talks about who can look at your records, how they need to be maintained, how long school districts can maintain records, and it defines, and believe it or not, the term educational record is can be somewhat indiscriminate. And so under FERPA, it defines exactly what is an educational record. And then as a entity like a school district, you have to ensure that families know what their rights are under FERPA. So if you ever got a student handbook or maybe a notice at the beginning of the year, maybe you signed some assurances, even as an incoming student here at Augustana, you probably had some sort of a FERPA notification within all of those documents. And it said, can we publish your name? Can we put your picture on our website? Things like that. All of that stuff falls under FERPA. So you as the adult student, or if you were a minor child, would have the right to inspect and review your records. And you have a right to request copies of those records. And you have the right to ask for an amendment of the records if you feel like the records aren't accurate. I had, and I'm just kind of jumping through these slides just a little bit, but basically all of these, I'm going to keep going. I don't want to give anyone motion sickness, but basically this slide, the next one, and the next one all talk about what has to occur in terms of FERPA and how parental consent has to be obtained before information is shared. So if you were in high school and you wanted to apply to Augustana to go to school, you would have to release that information. However, there are some pieces in FERPA that say if the school notifies you when you make a request to transfer records, they will send it automatically without notifying you because they gave you that notice when you originally got your, they did the FERPA announcements at the beginning of the school year or whatever like that. So if you move from district to district, what districts will typically do is they will, in their FERPA announcements, say, when you make a records request, you, the parent, or you, the adult student, for another school, we will automatically send those records forward. And so, you know, it's kind of promotes a seamless transfer of records, but at the same time, you want to understand that your records will be shared automatically. Now, there's other things that don't happen automatically, which is outside agencies wanting to see your records, like a military recruiter or a counselor or a physician. I mean, they can't just send personally identified information to those various entities and agencies unless you or if you're the adult student, have given consent, or your parent. Here's the slide that does talk about where they can send records and so forth and so on. One of the things that's interesting is that juvenile justice, so if you're a school age kid, we didn't have to have your consent to share your records if, say, you managed to do something that broke the law and ended up on probation. FERPA allows the school district to share your educational records with someone in the juvenile justice organization. In a district, everyone has to have someone identified as being responsible for confidentiality. In most school districts, it's usually somebody like a special education director, or the superintendent might be also responsible. We have to keep a list of anybody that accesses your educational records in case you would ever want to know who's been seeing your information. There is a certain point in time when your records are no longer needed by a public agency like a school district, and so we need to contact you if we're going to destroy those records. Usually, once you've left school, we don't necessarily have a forwarding address for you, and we keep records and maintain them for a certain set period of time. It's usually between 4 and 5 years after you've left our system. So then we would try to get a hold of your last known address to tell you we have these educational records. They're going to be destroyed unless you would like to come and get them. So often what happens is the last address we have for the adult student is no longer valid, and there isn't any way to get a hold of the adult student. So what you'll see might be like we would run ads in our local paper for a number of weeks at a time saying, if you attended school between this date and this date, we're going to destroy these educational records. And if you want these records, you can stop in our office before this date and we will give them to you. So this is becoming less and less of an issue as we are becoming more and more digitally capable in our school districts. Now we can scan files that previously took up, a good half a foot in a file cabinet and scan them, and now they're on a server and we can maintain them pretty much indefinitely, which is nice. You would be surprised how many times I got contacted by students who had left our system 10 and 15 years ago, and now we're trying to access some form of supports through state systems. Maybe they needed some record of a previous disability or something like that. And of course, after 5 years, we would get rid of those records because you can't maintain that many records. And then we wouldn't really have anything left for the adult students. So one of the last things that I was able to do in the last few years was digitize most of our records so that, for the future, students, even though they've been out of our system for 10 or 15 or even more years, should be able to get their records. I did have one time in the 13, 14 years I worked for the school district where I had a parent request an amendment of their child's educational records because they thought something was inaccurate. And so, it doesn't happen very often, but if you feel like there's something wrong as the adult student or the parent, you can request make changes. We do let you know in your parental rights that we have to report crimes. And we can report crimes of children with disabilities. We must report crimes of children with disabilities. And again, those educational records can be provided to those law enforcement agencies. All right, where are we at time-wise? We're at 2:30. Okay, we'll go just a little bit more. All right, another section of the procedural safeguards document talks about children who attend private schools who were placed there by their parent. Now, there's an important distinction here, and I just want to talk about that for a second. I'm going to step out of sharing my screen. I'm going to exit from this. Hang on. Okay. I'm going to stop presenting for just 1 second. Okay. So in IDEA, there are two different private school situations. One is where parents choose to place their child in a private school for their own choosing. It's their own choosing. Maybe they want their child to attend a private school. Maybe they want their child to attend a parochial or religious focused school system. So those are children that aren't placed there by the school district. They're placed there by their parents. And so when those children are placed in that program, that changes their entitlement to FAPE. Remember we talked about FAPE, free appropriate public education? Because you're not enrolled in the public school by your parent, you're not enrolled, you're not entitled to FAPE anymore, okay? It changes what the law will do for you and can do for you as a special education student. Pick that up, Molly.
Thank you.
No problem. All right, I just noticed that you're probably all looking at my pictures instead of my head. I haven't been paying any attention. All right. It's hard sitting on my bed. I have a nice desk downstairs, but my husband's working, so I can't hold a conference call next to him. He'd be unhappy. Okay, so the other type of private school student is a student like my daughter, who attends a program outside the school district. It's a privately run entity, but she's placed there by the school. And that means she is still a public education student. She is still entitled to FAPE. The way she gets FAPE is by attending this privately run program. So kids that are placed at Lifescape, kids that are placed at Children's Home Society by the school district are still public school kids, okay? So what you need to know is that in federal law, when you are placed in any of those entities, FAPE still applies to you. When parents choose to place their children in a parochial or otherwise private institution, because they're not entitled to FAPE, it changes how many rights you have as a parent. Okay, so this is what I'm going to show you right now, is what the rights are of parents. Sorry, hang on. I'll show you what the rights are of parents.
I love that cat.
Yeah, whose cat is that? Is that your cat, Molly?
Mine.
That's cute.
That's the best cat.
This is Titty.
Putty? All right.
Titty.
I'm not going to repeat that because I'll get it wrong. Okay. Can everybody see my screen again?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So here's the children who are placed into private schools by their parents. Okay. This is what the school district has to do for children who are placed voluntarily by their parents. Okay. Child find. Okay. Child find is the responsibility of the public school district to identify any children in their district who may be in need of special education. So whether you are in a public school or you're in a private school placed there by your parents, if your parent thinks you might have a disability, or if your teacher in your private school thinks you might have a disability, you can make a referral to the public school district. And if we determine you might have a disability and need evaluation, it's up to the public school district to evaluate you. So that is your first and biggest right you still have as a parentally placed private school student, is the right to be evaluated for a possible disability. Okay. The other right you have is to be periodically reevaluated, just like we do in public schools, which is we reevaluate every 3 years. Here's where the difference is. You do not get an IEP when you are a student who's placed in a private school by your parent. What you get is you get access to what's called equitable services, okay? And equitable services are based on a share of federal funds. So every school district that has a private school district in their borders has this little formula they follow to determine, St. Lambert's Catholic school has 10 children attending who are in special education in the Yankton School District. And so the Yankton School District plugs those 10 kids into the formula, and they get a small percentage, and I mean small, probably a few $1,000s, to provide services to all 10 children at that parochial school. Now, that doesn't mean the services happen at the parochial school. They might say, we will give services to these parochial school students, you'll have to bring them. Or we'll bring your kids over, but that cost of transporting them will also go against your IDEA fund allocation. So it's a very small pot of money. Plus, the district and the private parochial or whatever, the private school, together they do a consultation and they talk about what kind of services they would like their children to have. You know, it's very different than a public school student who we design a program wrapped around everything they need based on their evaluation. For private school students placed by their children, they don't get a say-so of you want ABA or you want speech therapy or you want direct instruction. That happens between the school and the private school. And they make a determination of, you know what, you have 10 kids, you're entitled to $3,000, we'll let you have $3,000 worth of speech therapy services. And once it's used up, the school district's obligation is done and the services are done. So that's how it works for children in private schools. And the reason it's in your procedural safeguards is because the federal government wants parents to know that if you place your child in a private school, this is what may happen. And this is what you can expect. So, all right. When FAPE's at issue, on this next slide, parental rights outline the responsibility of the parent if they intend to seek public school district payment for tuition of a private school for their child. This is a different situation than what I just laid out for you. This would be, let's say I live in the Sioux Falls School District and I'm dissatisfied with the services I'm getting, and I want to enroll my child in Children's Home Society, which is a private school. And I say to them, you know, I don't like what you're doing here. He needs Children's Home Society, and I'm going to place him there. I'm a parent trying to place my child there. There are certain rights the parent has, but there's certain responsibilities they have as well. Things they have to tell the school and things they have to allow the school to do if they intend to bill the school for this placement. Because that's what happens is families say, I disagree with you. I'm going to take you to a hearing. I'm going to place my child somewhere else, and you're going to be on the hook. If we haven't talked about the Andrew F. case yet this semester, I will at some point. That whole case was around a school and a parent who believed they weren't doing the right thing for their child in terms of services, and so they pulled their child out and enrolled them in a private program where he did much better, and then they basically gave the bill to the school district and said, you're on the hook. So this is the things that parents have to know if they're considering pulling their kids out of the public school and enrolling them in a private school and sending the bill to the public school. First of all, the parents have to tell the district they disagree with the placement, and they have to tell them that they intend to enroll their child. God darn it. Intend to enroll, yes?
I have vision right now of the road that I'm parked on, and there's two cars that are stuck.
Okay.
So I am like parked right behind them. So I'm going to go try to get my car out so I can make it to work. Is that okay?
Sure, that's fine. We're gonna have to catch up on Friday anyway, and this isn't ideal because I'm not connecting with anybody in a really good way, so I can't tell if like people are like it's way over my head or I'm with you. So you go and I'll wrap up, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Yep. All right. Be careful.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. Okay, so we'll stop there. We'll pick this up on Friday. Does everybody kind of get a sense of what I've been trying to do, though? That I'm taking you through the parental rights document, explaining to you what you will someday potentially have to explain to other people. Okay? It's very exciting stuff. Okay.
Over my cat's name.
The cat's name?
I am still laughing at that.
Yeah, well, you heard me. I'm like, I'm not repeating that. I'm not going there. Okay. So current events on Friday. Emily, do you want to tell us your current event really quick?
Yeah.
Emily can't be here on Friday.
I know. Okay, so you can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I I read this article about, it's in Fresno, California, and the shortage of speech and language pathologists, and they are now switching from like being there in person to online. So it's kind of like a big deal, and there's like a lot of different opinions because there's lack of one-on-one time. But the main problem is they just can't, like there's 23 vacant speech language pathologist positions, so there's nothing they can really do. So a lot of people are like upset about it. So they're trying to train people from the community to become speech pathologists as much as they can. But I just thought it was interesting because I just thought about for like young students, like really young students, being like over like we are would be really, really tough.
Yeah.
So that's just what I read about, I guess.
Yep. Does anybody else have any experience? It's too bad Molly had to go because I'm sure she has had some opportunities to learn about and hear about telemedicine for speech therapy. You're nodding your head a little bit. What do you guys think? Have you heard this? Do you know anybody that's used telemedicine for therapies?
I've heard of it for like regular therapy, like counseling,
Yep.
that kind of
Yep. Yeah,
Also,
I don't know.
couch behind you.
What's that?
I'm asking Emily if that's Lily on the couch behind her.
Yeah, it is. Anyway.
It's a great article, Emily, and it's I think that was Fresno, right?
Yeah.
And I mean that's California. That's kind of like you would think there'd be tons of people wanting to live and work in California. And we have a huge issue here in South Dakota. And so I don't think we're any different than anybody else. We are always struggling to find speech therapists. It was always my worst nightmare when one of my speech therapists would end up needing to leave because they were retiring or moving on or whatever. And because it just, I mean, that would be my whole summer. I would just like turn into a speech therapy stalker. I'd be like, do you know a speech therapist? Are you friends with a speech therapist? Do you have any idea where I might find a speech therapist? Because
And it's like there's a lot less graduates too, so it's gonna get worse unless, I don't know.
Yeah, well, in South Dakota, we just have the one program at the University of South Dakota, and they only take about, I think, 10 to 15 students a year. And, speech therapists work with, like you said, they work with babies, but they also work with all populations, including the elderly, which is our largest growing population. And they require a lot of speech therapy because they have brain injuries and other accidents that involve the swallowing. And that's the specialty area for a lot of speech therapists, is that mechanics of the fine motor and all that. It's a big deal. Yeah. I keep telling my kids, I'm like, some of you just need to go to school for something that ends in the word therapy. Nobody's listened to me so far. So, but yeah. Good article. All right. Okay. Everybody else, try to find a little something to share on Friday, and then we will wrap up procedural safeguards Friday. Okay. All right. Cool. Try not to have any accidents today. Drive safe if you have to drive anywhere, and we'll see you on Friday.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.